it's labeled as Sunday. It's not really Sunday morning, but that's okay. It says Sunday morning, but it's not really Sunday morning. Well, I'll change the caption later. All right, back to the book of Genesis. Back to the story of Joseph. And 2 or 3 questions before we get into the text. Anybody remember how old was Joseph whenever he was thrown in the pit? How old was he whenever he was rose to a position of power in Pharaoh's? 30 years old. So that means he spent 13 years in some type of bondage, some type of slavery before he arose to that position of authority, second in Egypt. So for 13 years, almost half his life, he's 17 years old. So 13 years, Joseph had ups and downs, but he was in some type of bondage, slavery, in somebody else's house. We often look at circumstances and we question what God is doing. Sometimes we may not see it for a period of time. But y'all know the culture that we live in now, especially with media. What's one phrase that you guys can use for the way we are now? We want immediate what?
Gratification.
Immediate gratification. We want immediate satisfaction. We want things right now. Where if you look back at older times, it was almost like things went slower. People planned for the future. They prepared for things like that. So you can imagine in Joseph's time, 13 years he spent in all these things. I mean, it seems like to us kind of can be a short term, but it also is to him at the time you could think it would be a long term. But for us, we want immediate gratification. That's one of the reasons for the way that advertising, social media, and stuff like that goes on. Have you noticed that when you see a commercial, you got some of these commercials are kind of funny, and you see the commercial for the first time, and that commercial's somewhere around 1 minute, a full 60 seconds long. 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, that same commercial, they've cut it, and it is now only 30 seconds long. And some of the last times that they run that commercial, seconds are millions of dollars when it comes to national TV. But whenever the last time you'll ever see that commercial, it will be down to less than 15 seconds, sometimes only 10 seconds. But you know what?
You'll remember all
of it. It's the way we're programmed, and that's the way that they do things. And one of the reasons that in our minds we want things to be shorter. That's one of the reasons that when it comes to these, what they call them, TikTok and these short videos.
Snapchat.
What?
Snapchats.
Reels, these little short videos, funny videos. It used to be funniest home videos, and they actually found out pretty quick that the shorter the video, the more people liked it. They don't like a long video. A 2-hour movie or 3-hour movie it really takes a really good script or some type of what we call it, a saga or something. But these days, people, they want a 1 minute, 2 minute video clip, say it and get to the point. Pastors and teachers are also understanding that is kind of the same way too, because if you go more than about 20, 25 minutes teaching something or preaching something, you'll lose them. I wish I had a camera sometimes that was back in the back that showed the congregation, because come to 11:55, I start losing people.
Yeah. Start looking at their phone.
No, they don't start looking at the phone. No, they just fade out. Some will actually go to sleep. Some play on their phone, but mostly just...
Jimmy takes, he's back here snoozing.
But we're short attention span. Back when Joseph went through all this, you can imagine what he went through at the times he went there. From the time that, if we look at the baker, the cup holder, cupbearer, when they forgot who he was, it was years before they remembered him. He was in prison. can you imagine that what was going through his mind? I would have ill thoughts. I would, well, if my brothers threw me in a pit, I would probably have, y'all would too, right? If your brothers tied you up, threw you down in a pit, and then sold you off and told your dad that you were dead, you'd be a little upset at them too.
Especially when I saw him again.
You know, I was talking to a preacher friend of mine in the last couple of weeks, and we were talking about the story of Joseph. And I brought up, I said, can you imagine when his brothers walked in? And we're going to see this in the text. Can you imagine the feeling that what was going on whenever his brothers walked in?
Off of their heads.
Well, he very well could have. But what the text tells us now is that because, just like in Job, because he trusted in the one true God. Remember now, he was a dreamer. He was a discerner of the dreams, and interpreter of the dreams. So he trusted in the one true God and knew that even though things didn't look so good on the surface, God was still in control. So things after the fact. So Joseph, as we read through the text, keep in mind that is who Joseph was. It wasn't that he was great superhuman or superhero or anything like that, but that just simply he trusted. We know that by several pieces of the text. You remember the one where Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him, and what did he say? I'm loyal, but also it would be sin against the one true God. So Joseph's, all of his things that are going on, the only thing that, in my mind, that could keep Joseph together, keep him from not losing it, in anger or trying justice is like our culture is today, is understanding that God was at work. That's the only answer that it could be for all that he went through and where he ended up, is that he just simply knew that God was at work. 13 years in some type of slavery, some type of bondage. And then we have him in the house as second coming. All right, chapter number 41, verses 39, 41, 46, that gives us the picture of him moving up into that position. Now we're going to start at chapter number 42, or look at verse number 57 at the end of chapter number 41. And it repeats this, I think, 3 times. It repeats it in the end of chapter number 41, the start of chapter number 43, and again somewhere else. But it says, all the countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in all the lands. Chapter number 42, verse number 1 says, now when Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said unto his sons, this is Israel, Israel, said unto his sons, why do ye look upon one another? And he said, behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Get you down thither, and buy for us thence, that we may live and not die. In chapter number 43, verse number 1, and the famine was sore in the land. In other words, it was bad enough that people were literally dying. It was a true famine. I don't think that we here, I don't know about you guys, but back when I was in my early teenage years, there was a time when my family didn't have much, but I didn't go hungry, and I didn't worry about starving to death. Here, this is proof to us that in that time, they were worried about starving to death. There was a true famine. So, with Joseph in Egypt and what he had done in interpreting the dreams, it actually saved the lives of many people. Yes, they had to buy, and Pharaoh did get rich, but it saved the lives of many people because of the dreams that he interpreted, and Pharaoh agreed to it. Chapter number 42, the first arrival of the brothers coming into Egypt. We're going to skip through that, and I'm going to let you guys read through the text of 42, but we're going to start with 43, which is the second visit back. It came to pass when they had eaten up the corn which they had brought out of Egypt, that the father said unto them, go again, buy us a little food. And Judah spake unto him, saying, the man did solemnly protest to us, saying, you shall not see my face, except your brother be with you. Well, why do you think he said that? And their time had passed during this time. They had to go back and consume all the wheat that they had bought at the time. So when Jacob told them to go back and buy more, Joseph had said, don't come back here again unless you bring the youngest. Now, they didn't know why, but Joseph had not ever seen who. So Joseph, in that place of this power, the ultimate power that he had, second only to Pharaoh, and he told them, don't come back here. And he knew they would have to. Okay, he knew they would have to for two reasons. One is that, remember the dream. The first dream was that the brothers would bow down, right? And we see that happens, later in chapter 43, there's the brothers bow down. But the second dream, when the interpretation of it was that the sun and the moon, in other words, Jacob, Israel, the father, they would also bow down with the brothers. So that dream, that interpretation, or that prophecy had not come about yet. So Joseph knew that they would have to return again. And he said, don't come back. I don't want to see your face unless you bring your brother. So down to verse number 13, Jacob relents. He says, take also your brother, arise and go again to the man, and God Almighty give you mercy before the man, that he may send you away your brother and your other brother and Benjamin. If I be bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. So they all went, Benjamin along with them, and present themselves in front of Joseph. When they get to Joseph's back to there again, this is the second time that Joseph has seen them. We talk about the first time that they come in front of Joseph, and I won't say conspiring, but the plan that Joseph begins to bring up, sending them home, and don't come back unless the youngest brother, keep the one. There's what do you call it? Not a conspiracy. What am I looking for here? Joseph is devising a plan that would cause all of them to have to come to Egypt. Of course, that's where the wheat is. That's where the famine, they're taking care of the food for the famine. So they're going to all have to come. So by the time we get to, let's see, let's drop down to verse number 25 and start from there. And they made ready the present against Joseph, against Joseph came at noon, for they heard that they should eat bread there. And when Joseph came home, they brought him the present, which was in their hand, and into the house, and bowed themselves to him to the earth. And he asked them of their welfare, and he said, is your father well? The old man of whom you spake, is he yet alive? So you can imagine, the first thing is he's asking about dad. Is my dad still? He hasn't revealed himself yet. Is Jacob still alive? And they answered, thy servant, our father, is good in health, and he is yet alive. And they bowed down their heads and made obeisance. And he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son. And remember, this is his true brother. The rest are what? Stepbrothers, right? This is his true brother, Benjamin. He lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, is this your younger brother, of whom you spake unto me? And he said, God be gracious unto thee, my son. And Joseph made haste, for his bowels did yearn upon his brother, and he sought where to weep, and he entered into his chamber and wept there. Let's soak this in a moment. Sometimes there's us, we would go, boy, like he said a moment ago, off with our heads. But here Joseph is actually happy to the point that he has got to see them and his one and only true brother, not half-brother. And he washed his face and went out and refrained himself and said, set on bread. And they set on him for himself and for themselves and for the Egyptians, which did eat with him by themselves, because the Egyptians might not eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination unto the Egyptians. Not truly understanding that the second one in command was a Hebrew. I mean, they were blinded, if you will, by this whole thing too. There's a whole lot of unknowns here, and we can see that the one true God, God Almighty, is the one that's in control, and these guys just simply don't know what's going on. And they sat before him the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men marveled one at another. And he took and sent messages unto them before him. But Benjamin's mess was 5 times so much as any of theirs. And they drank and were merry with him. Now, what do you think would go through their mind? Well, here it goes again. The youngest is the spoiled one. He's he gets whatever he wants. I'm the oldest in my family. And I kind of thought that the youngest, which would be Joseph in my family, Joseph is the youngest. And there were times where I thought, boy, he sure is spoiled. He gets whatever he wants. His mama.
So you have thrown him in the pit.
And, well, Barry and I considered it a few times.
Sold him the paint rock.
I think we even got accused of it a few times. So Barry, which is 3 years younger than us, but Joseph is 16 years younger than I am. So we got accused of it anyway. But so here we go again, Benjamin being the youngest, and Joseph sends to him 5 times more. I mean, it's obvious, okay? When they bring the food around and it's all sitting there, here's Benjamin and the rest of them's, it's obvious. It's obvious. And in verse number 1, chapter 44, he commanded the steward of his house, saying, fill the men's sacks with food, and put as much as they can carry, and put every man's money in his sack's mouth, and put my cup, the silver cup, in the sack's mouth, the youngest of the youngest, and his corn money, and he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. Uh-oh. Now what do you think is going to happen? When they open these things up, and number 1, find the money, that's going to be bad enough. Because it sure is going to look. But in the youngest one, in Benjamin's pouch, when they open this thing up, and here's this chalice, obviously the king's chalice, or the Joseph's chalice, did he steal it? That's going to be the question. And I'm sure they were. Okay, verse number 3. As soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away, they and their asses, and when they were gone out of the city and not yet far off, Joseph said unto his steward, up, follow after them, and when thou dost overtake them, say unto them, wherefore have you rewarded evil for good? Is not it in which my Lord drinketh, and whereby indeed he divineth, ye have done evil in so doing. Now, as I was telling you a moment ago, a preacher friend of mine, we got talking about this, back when Joseph was interpreting the dreams. Can you imagine when Joseph was interpreting the dreams and it came out that his brothers are going, and he's the youngest, and he's wearing the coat of many colors, he's daddy's boy at the time, and he tells his brothers, oh, y'all are going to bow down. Well, it makes them mad because he's obviously the favored one, the favorite. But then whenever he says, oh, the next dream or the next interpretation is that, yeah, y'all going to bow down, but also the moon, stars, mom and daddy's going to also bow down. A preacher friend of mine, we were talking, we were thinking, do you think Joseph being a teenager might have been a little bit arrogant in the whole thing? The Bible doesn't tell us, but we just wonder those things. Now, if he was a little arrogant, and if there was a time that he was not getting justice, but in getting even would even be the wrong word. This would be that moment when these guys, the pharaohs, or the I don't know, whatever you call these, the servants, that they chased him down here. He said, as soon as morning was light, the men were sent away in their asses. When they were gone out of the city and not yet far off, Joseph said unto his steward, follow after them. So you imagine he took a few people that were armed, and whenever they showed up, can you imagine Judah, Benjamin especially being the youngest, but can you imagine Reuben, Judah, and Manasseh, all of them, whenever they opened up the pouches, here's the money, and oh, here is the cup. You think their hearts sunk? You think they thought, well, this is it. We're done for. I'm not saying that Joseph did that to get back at them, but it sure.
Set him up.
Huh?
Because he turned around and told his steward to go get him.
Yeah, but the whole plan was that the whole family, because in this, see, if he had just let them go back, that they went back, and if the famine had ended, or if they had enough, whatever, they would never have returned to Egypt. So the prophecy wasn't fulfilled yet. So there had to be something to get Jacob, Israel, to come to Egypt, right? I mean, they had to. So this little plan or whatever, if you want to call it, worked to get them to come back, to get Jacob to even come. But I guess my point is at that moment, if Joseph was trying to get even with his brothers, that would be the moment. I'm not saying this is in the plan of, because this whole picture was to save the family, and this whole thing that God was doing in the background was saving the people and saving the Jews, of course, the Hebrews, Israel and the family. But at that moment, whenever they opened up those pouches, that'd be Reuben, Judah, Manasseh, all of them. I bet their hearts sank. Could you imagine? Because they did not know who Joseph was. They
thought they were going to be thrown in prison.
Yeah, or beheaded. You know, this was it. We're done for it. Verse number 11 says, Then they speedily took down every man of his sack to the ground and opened up every man's sack, and searched and began the eldest and left the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they rent their clothes and led every man his ass and returned to the city. And Judah and his brethren came to Joseph's house, for he was yet there, and they fell before him on the ground. Prophecy fulfilled. And Joseph said unto them, What deed is this that you have done? What not such a man as I can certainly divine? And Judah said, What shall we say unto my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God hath found out the iniquity of thy servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also with whom the cup is found. As he said, he said, God forbid that I should do so, but the man in whose hand the cup is found, he shall be my servant, and as for you, get you up in peace unto your father. So Benjamin now is going to stay with Joseph. Let's kind of back away and look at this. That's not a bad thing, because Joseph loves Benjamin. Remember the first time he's seen him, that's his mother's son. That's his brother. So Joseph wants him, but the whole plan was to get the whole family back there. They, on the other hand, thought this was a bad thing. Oh, Benjamin is now a servant in the household of Joseph, or in the household of Pharaoh. But God had other plans. So, you ever think that, or do we think that way sometimes when things look so bad? Do we stop and think, well, God's at work here, and it might not be as bad as what it looks like? Because it sure did look bad on their part. But for Benjamin, although it may have looked real bad to start with, it wasn't. Because he was going to be protected, fed, and eventually set up, and he would be a family member of the Most High, second Most High in all of Egypt. So God's at work sometimes, and when we think it's like helpless, hopeless, it's not.
In all this chaos, they didn't see grace at work.
You're right. They were still believers in one true God, but they just couldn't. Remember, they were sinners, and what Judah says here, we found the iniquity here. They were sinners, and boy, Judah is one of them right up there at the top with all the things. We go back chapters and we see the things that Judah had done. You can imagine standing before Joseph, not knowing who Joseph was. Is this the judgment of God falling upon us? Is it now time? Okay, I wanted to hurry up here. Okay, so they are sent back home without Benjamin. Benjamin stays there, and you can imagine what they were thinking the whole time. But Joseph, all right. Okay. Verse number 20, let's start at verse number 27 and read down, because we're going to see where he identifies himself. And thy servants and my father said unto us, Ye know that my wife bare me 2 sons. And the one went out from me, and I said, Surely he is torn in pieces, referring to Joseph, and I saw him not sin. And if you take this also from me, and mischief befall him, you shall bring me down bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. In other words, I'm going to die crying. Now therefore, when I come to thy servant my father, and the lad be not with us, seeing that his life is bound up in his lad's life, it shall come to pass when he seeth that the lad is not with us, that he will die, and thy servant shall bring down his gray hairs. Verse number 34, for how shall I go to my father, and the lad be not with me, lest peradventure I see the evil that shall come upon my father. So they were concerned that basically Jacob is going to see them without Benjamin, and he was just going to die of grief right there. All right, chapter number 45, verse number 1. Then Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him, and he cried, because every man to go out from him, and there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. Can you imagine? And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph. Now, there are times when we see the I am here. This is kind of it later on when we see Moses says, who do I say sent me? And God says, just tell him I am. So God is to us, he is the I am. Everything that we need, anything that you could imagine that you need, not what you want, anything that we need, God is the I am for that, whatever question you can come with, he is the I am. In this case, Joseph was everything they needed. He was second in command, and there he could sustain them, he could feed them. He had the right to have them beheaded because of what they had done. But in this case, because of the mercy, he was the I am for everything that they needed. So whenever he said, I am Joseph, he was the I am at that moment. He said, I am Joseph, doth my father yet live? His brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. And Joseph said unto his brethren, come near to me, I pray you. And they came near, and he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. They had to have, at that moment, the light bulb went on. They just, it was like, can you imagine what overcome them at that moment? Now therefore, be not grieved nor angry with yourselves that you sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. Joseph believed. In all the 13 years that Joseph was in all that mess, in and out of the prisons, avoiding the seduction, the cupbearer and the baker, the promises there, the broken promises, that time, Joseph truly trusted that whatever was happening, God was at work. And he did that to preserve life. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in which there shall be earing nor harvest. So they were early on in this famine. Remember, it tells us at least twice, I think 3 times, that the famine was sore. In other words, people were dying. Jacob was worried about dying if they didn't go to Egypt and to get corn or wheat. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth and to save your lives by great deliverance. So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God. And he hath made me a father to Pharaoh and the Lord of all his house, and ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Haste ye, and go to my father, and say to him, thus saith thy son Joseph, God hath made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down unto me, tarry not. So they were concerned about going back to Jacob, and Jacob dying just simply because he didn't have Benjamin with him. He lost Joseph, but now Joseph says, no, go back and tell him that I'm alive. And not only I, but Benjamin, and everybody's going to live because God has established this as a preservation for the Jews. Haste ye and go to my father to say to him. Verse number 10, and thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen, and thou shalt be near unto me, thou and thy children, and thy children's children, and thy flocks, and thy herds, and all that thou hast, and there will I nourish thee, for yet there are 5 years of famine, lest thou and thy household and all that thy house come to poverty. And behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin that is in my mouth, that speaketh unto you. And ye shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt, and of all that I have seen, and all ye shall haste and bring down my father hither. And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brethren and wept upon them. And after that, his brethren talked with him. So they were no longer that fear, if you would, what's going to happen, the fear of being beheaded or whatever. And the fame thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brethren are come. And it pleased Pharaoh well, and his servants. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Say unto thy brethren, this do you, lave your beasts, and go get you into the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households, and come unto me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land. I remember whenever they first came, the Egyptians wouldn't even eat with the Hebrews, right? Remember it told us that? Just like all around the world now, when it comes to the Jews, the Hebrews, they're thought lowly of. It was abomination for the Egyptians to even eat with the Jews. But now all of a sudden things have changed. Whenever they heard the fame of all this happen, Pharaoh was happy that Joseph was a Hebrew, and the thing that he had done had saved his family. Pharaoh's servants were happy. That's what Scripture tells us. And all the fame, Joseph said, I'm going to give you the good of the land of Egypt. Okay? So as Jacob came, they were elevated to a status in the land of Egypt. VIPs. So you can imagine for a period of time. Now, we'll finish with this. But the Bible tells us before the book of Genesis closes that in 400 years, at this time, this family and the Hebrews here, as they grew great, they were it. They were the, what do you want to call it? The VIPs, the celebrities, if you will. They had the good of the land. They were it.
Yeah, the Bible says it pleased Pharaoh to do this to him. That speaks to Joseph, right? Like how well he had served Pharaoh.
Until the next Pharaoh came along and said, "Here you go."
Verse 8, I think we read it past it. To me, is like the most moving verse in the whole chapter, verse 8. I was reading along with you in LSD. How does the King James, how does verse 8 read?
In chapter 46.
Yeah, the one we were just in.
And these are the names of the children of Israel which came into Egypt.
I guess
Verse
45.
Chapter 45?
Yeah,
Yeah,
45.
so we're not in 46 yet.
Verse 8 in chapter 45.
Okay. So now it was, So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt.
That very first line is the most moving of the whole chapter.
Yeah.
Because he can see the big picture. It speaks to like spiritual maturity, right? Because he was upset with his brothers for sure, but then he sees the big picture.
Yeah, he
He
sees-
didn't do this. God did this.
Yeah, but yes, but I think that it even went a little bit deeper because he was an interpreter of the dreams.
Yes,
So
yeah.
all the way back whenever he was a 17-year-old, as a teenager, when he began these dreams and the interpretation of the dreams, you can imagine even sitting in a prison cell, he's thinking, God, you said. This was an interpretation, a discerner of the dreams. God, you
shared
said.
it with him previously. He touched on it with him about how he could.
So-
I imagine that when they started connecting the dots,
Oh, yeah.
the Bible said they kind of sat there froze for a minute. They didn't know how to respond.
Absolutely. So with all the people in Egypt, you can imagine the story has been told many times over. These guys sold Joseph into slavery. He comes to Egypt. He rises to power. Joseph is seen as the savior of Egypt. I know you guys have heard me say it before. The first pyramid that they talk about, the pyramids. We've got the huge pyramids, the Giza and such. But the first pyramid was not really a pyramid, but it's actually a grain silo, a series of them. But they call that pyramid dozers, which is interpretation or translation, Joseph's pyramid. He had those built before the famine started. They had the 7 years of plenty. excuse me, and then the 7 years of the famine, Joseph had those built to put the grain in. So Joseph was known during that time period. You can imagine, even after Joseph died, all the Hebrews, as they had children. After, you can imagine how many Hebrews, how fast that Egypt swelled with Hebrews. But the Bible tells us that 400 years later, and you can imagine, as you said, I think a moment ago, as the next Pharaoh came in, as the next Pharaoh, the next Pharaoh, and the next Pharaoh, it got to the point that they were sick of the Hebrews. They wouldn't hear it no more. So just like cultures around the world, there are religions, like with the Muslims and some of the others, whenever they go in and take over a place, well, the Romans were doing it too. Remember when the Romans took over Jerusalem, the assimilation, but also in Jerusalem, when the Romans took over it the third time, I think it was, they eliminated, it was actually outlawed that a Jew could be in Jerusalem, and they renamed.
Revelation.
That's what?
When Maccabee revolt.
Yes, and they literally changed the name of Jerusalem to Palestina. That's where the land got the name Palestine.
So, because the children of Israel had already, did their slavery, went out into the land of Canaan, but for years to come, they still did business with Egypt. They still had to try to. So they were known. But I love how the scripture always points such a good job of, it wasn't them or their righteousness, but the reputation of their God that always went before.
And that's it. And we really see that as we go into Exodus, we will see that as they're in the desert, that over and over again, it's what he did. Even like with Moses, go strike the rock, Moses. They're thirsty, or he pleads out to God, and God tells him, go strike the rock and you'll get water. You get plenty of water. And all of those are the Exodus. But the next time he says, no, this time go speak to it. But what did Moses do?
He struck it.
He went and struck it.
And
So,
that was what kept him that small
Yeah.
getting out of the promise.
yeah.
So Joseph was basically called, just like in Romans 8:28, he was called, he had a purpose. God called him for the purpose.
Benjamin hadn't been born at the time that this happened.
No, he had not been born.
So
Joseph,
this is why he was so moved for his younger brother and was bestowing all the extra stuff on him.
because he was born
Yeah.
of Rachel.
Yeah, it was like the full brother, right?
Remember that Jacob had the 4 wives, Rachel, Leah, help me out.
We should
Leah
try,
was first,
Bill
then
Hall.
Rachel.
we do movie nights a lot. This would be a good one to find. How moving that would be for anybody.
Yeah, I think there is a couple of decent Christian
Like, then
movies.
you go through it with brothers and
Jake
that emotion.
Joseph
Yeah.
and
Think about
Technicolor
Jacob when they
Dreamcoat.
come home and break this to Jacob.
Yeah.
Like he had to be just flabbergasted.
Yeah,
You know
you can
what I mean?
imagine.
I was wondering, I've read that story many a time, but why does it swap back and forth, calling him Jacob and Israel in different parts? You see what I'm saying?
I've questioned that myself. From what I understand, is that when it's referring to Jacob, it's referring to his humanity, because Jacob, the name, implies trickster. It implies the flesh, if you will. But when he's called Israel, let's go back to the naming. When he's renamed Israel, the name of, let's see. Chapter number 35, verse number 10. And God said unto him, Thy name is Jacob. Thy name shall not be called any more Jacob, but Israel shall be thy name. And he called his name Israel. Now,
But yet he's called Jacob again. And after that,
yeah, it
You know,
is
I mean, once Abraham's name was changed, I mean, you never
Yeah.
heard
Abram
again.
to Abraham.
There's so many archetypes and stuff in there though. Like it makes me think of all of us. We know the Bible says that when we're saved, behold, all things have come new. But we know the Apostle Paul says that when I would do good, I find evil present with me. And that, to me, it just reminds us that we all have an old man, because we can't forget that, right?
That's
what Peter talks about all the time.
So you're saying when they're referencing in here, they're referencing the old man, not Israel.
No.
Because later on in,
Yeah.
we get into 46 6, it says Israel resides in Egypt for.
Well, it's not that they're per se referencing him in that context, but maybe as a reminder to us that we still have that spirit of flesh that does war. Maybe it's just a distant reminder for us to think of.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know that it necessarily pertains to Jacob and Israel in the context, probably not.
Yeah,
But
using
maybe you said, you read the Ryrie said something, or what
Yeah.
was it?
in my Ryrie, one of the commentaries here, and I kind of like the way it goes. But yes, it does bounce back and forth to Israel and Jacob. Jacob being his fleshly name. But here's what this says. God, this is chapter number 32. You remember the wrestling when Jacob wrestles with the angel?
Yeah.
Okay. So God, this is what it says. God allowed himself to be overcome by Jacob, though he crippled him. Remember when he touched him in the thigh? Whether temporarily or for the rest of his life, the Bible doesn't tell us. His limp, however, was proof that this was no mere dream. In other words, it literally happened. The Lord wanted to depart from before daylight, lest Jacob see him. That's chapter number 33, verse number 20. But Jacob insisted on being blessed first. This comes back to that. Jacob's flesh, his name means trickster. He's a sorry old character, but he believed. This is where you come back to your salvation. So, but he says, now the word, the name Israel, which means he fights or persists with God, referring to prayer. In other words, pray without ceasing, or a point where you not arguing with God, but petitioning. What would you call that?
Fervent.
It's what? Fervent prayer. Yeah, where something you want so much, you believe in him, but you continue on. Well, God stayed there with Jacob. God could have left at any time, but because Jacob wanted it so much, he wanted what he had, not earthly things, then he stayed.
To me, looking at maybe a little bit deeper, I've prayed that prayer a lot in my life. We all know it, right? I will not let you go until you bless me. I will not turn you loose. It's a powerful prayer, and that makes me think that it was, again, Jacob's own strength that overcame the Lord, or his righteousness. It was the fact that he understood his source.
Yes.
He just knew his source. And all of his sin and all of his wrongdoing and all of his testimony, he just knew what source to turn to. And I think that's why God blessed him.
Yeah.
He didn't say, I won't turn loose
Absolutely.
of all these other things. He said, I will not turn loose of you until you bless me. Because he knew his source.
Totally agree. And then there, I believe that is the root of why he changed his name from Jacob to Israel. He's still Jacob, especially to his children. Would have probably called him father or something, but the servants would have probably called him Jacob.
Yeah. Nowadays, your grandchildren are hearing things that Papa Darren did when he was younger that they're like, I can't believe Papa done that. Jacob's kids must have heard some things that he wasn't. His grandchildren heard about him.
Good point. So that's it. All right, next week we will be deeper into the last days of Joseph and the forgetting, and how the implication of that is for the future. And then we'll be moving out of Genesis pretty quick. The death of Jacob.
And the descendants of Joseph finished building the rest of the pyramid.
We'll study very briefly on the tribes and the meaning of that, because that all sets up as they leave Egypt, as we're getting closer and closer to the Passover, and probably week after next we'll be in there, and the significance that has even today, because the blood of the Lamb is applied. That's the foreshadowing prophecy of Jesus on the cross. All right, any questions or anything? I love you guys, and remember, you guys are watching. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel.